Well, thank you. There wouldn't be a reasons to believe it wasn't for this church. I served for 11 years here as a minister of evangelism, and that's when the church came to me and said, we want to help you launch an organization. So I'm eternally grateful for what this church has done, not only for me, but for our whole scholar community of people around the world. And, the first service I spoke about how big God is and how that should influence our prayer life. And I'm going to be speaking about the animals in this message. And after this is over, I'm going to be doing the Paradoxes class, which you heard I've been doing for 49 years. And that class is interesting. It's 30 minutes of teaching and 45 minutes of Q&A and debate. And we did a short Q&A after the first service. I'm not going to be able to do that with the second service, but I will hang around to take questions up until 12 noon. At 12 noon, you need to let me go down and teach the Paradoxes class. But if you've got questions, you can join us there in the Paradoxes class literally every Sunday. But I do take questions on my social media pages. So Hugh Ross Facebook, Hugh Ross Twitter. Every day I post some science-faith connection and invite people to ask questions. One time I got 7,500 questions, so most of them atheists. I mean, I'm kind of unusual on social media. I don't have as many friends as I've got enemies. So atheists from all over the world want to jump on me, but you can actually see the engagement that takes place between us, so take advantage of that. Likewise, on our YouTube channel, a lot of those are debates that we have with atheists around the world. But what I'm going to be speaking about in this service is from my book, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job. And, that's the most science-heavy book in the entire Bible. But in this book, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job, I really focus on what Job has got to say about animals. And the passage we just heard, God designed the higher animals, the birds and mammals, not only to teach us lessons about nature, but especially to teach lessons about spiritual matters, about the gospel. So you can get a free chapter of that book at reasons.org. In fact, you can get free chapters of 8 of my books just by going to reasons.org. And if you run into an atheist or a skeptic, you can also tell them they can get chapters at reasons.org. But yes, the answers we get from animals to life's big questions. And when it comes to animals, people today know less than what people knew in the days of Job. I mean, as I engage scientists at universities around the world, what I notice is the pride that they manifest about how much they know about nature. But when it comes to animals, people in the 21st century actually know less than what people who lived 4,000 years ago. And so I'm not going to be using any differential calculus on you today. We're going to be talking about the science that everybody appreciated and understood 4,000 years ago. And it was Job who said, ask the beasts and they will teach you. And the beast is a term for land mammals. Ask the land mammals and they will teach you. Or the birds of the sky and they will tell you. Now, when you get to the very first page of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, what you notice, it uses the Hebrew word for create, the word bara, only 3 times. The first time you see it is when God creates the universe. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And incidentally, you will run into people who say, how come the Bible gets it dead wrong from the first verse? We all know that the earth came much later than the heavens. What they don't understand, in biblical Hebrew, there is no word for universe. There is in Greek, but not in biblical Hebrew. Instead, they have this idiomatic phrase, the heavens and the earth. Used 13 times in the Old Testament, it always refers to the totality of physical reality. So that's when God created the universe. The second time you see the word create is when God creates the birds and the sea mammals. And here it's talking, and by the way, what you notice about these birds and sea mammals, it says God made them and he created them. When he uses the word asa, to make, it means that God is personally involved in manufacturing these creatures from the material that already exists. The word bara is something brand new that never existed before. The physical entities of these birds and mammals previously existed in other creatures. What was brand new was their soulishness, that they were created, not only physically, but with a property of being able to engage one another through their will and their emotions and their intellect. Then you go into creation day 6, and it doesn't talk about when God created the first land mammals. It jumps ahead to 3 specialized kinds of land mammals. And it's really referring to those land mammals that God created to help humans launch civilization. So the first one it mentions are the rodents, the short-legged land mammals. You say, what do we need those for? Well, we humans are wonderfully designed to survive in a hot climate. We're tall and slim with very little hair, and we're bipedal, so sun only shines on our head, and we got this wonderful perspiration system. But we're horribly designed for cold climates. But God gave us the rodents. And the first humans noted these rodents like hanging around us. They're cheap to feed, and they seem to not mind being around thousands of their buddies. And so early humans developed relationships where they're able to harvest the pelts and the furs of these creatures to meet clothing needs that take them into very cold regions. And then it mentions, and by the way, today we don't need their furs, but we need them for medical lab experiments. I mean, we also think, the apes are the closest to us human beings. When it comes to our digestive tract, when it comes to the chemicals that work in our brain, the closest animal to us are mice and rats. And notice, they're very good as lab animals because you can raise thousands of them in a building, and they're very social. They work fine with humans, and we've been able to use these rats and mice to develop amazing medical advances that continue to this very day. Then the text mentions 2 different kinds of long-legged land animals, those that are easy to tame, a reference to the herbivores, and these are the animals that Job talks about that play a crucial role in helping us to launch agriculture: the sheep, the goats, the horses, the cows, the camels. And then it mentions the long-legged land animals that are difficult to tame. And these are the carnivores. Difficult to tame, but once tamed, make excellent household companions and pets and guard animals. And I show a lion here because when I was on the faculty at Caltech, we had a student that brought his pet lion to class every day. And the lion loved going to Caltech because it got lots of social attention. In fact, the student would bring the lion into the lecture hall. The first thing the lion would do is charge down toward where the professor was and then sit beside the professor, because the lion knew that everybody would be looking at the professor, and hence everybody would be looking at her. And our favorite thing was at lunchtime when they released all the toddlers from daycare, and those toddlers would romp with the lion. The lion really loved that. So they are very good at, and basically what we see in the book of Job, God designed these animals either to serve us or to please us, and sometimes to do both. And he uses this word nefesh to refer to these animals that God created. And it means that these are animals that God endowed with intelligence, with will, and emotions. These are the creatures that relate to one another emotionally. They sacrifice to nurture their young, and they have the capacity and the desire to assist and please a higher species, namely us human beings. And this is dealt with in detail in Job 38 and 39, which expands on the Genesis 1 message, that one reason that God created these soulish animals was to assist and please us, to help us launch civilization, and each one does it in a different way from all the others. And what we notice is that these soulish animals were designed to assist and please us human beings before we even existed, which means they didn't adapt to us. They were created. They were designed to serve and please us. But if you know anything about Charles Darwin, he didn't believe this. And he especially wrote about this in his book, Descent of Man. And what he claimed there is that the differences between humans and non-humans is simply one of degree and not of kind. He argued we don't fundamentally differ from the non-human animals. We only differ by degree. And part of that, what you see in Descent of Man, is he predicted that the animals that look most like us will also most closely match our intellectual capabilities. And so, yes, he looked at the chimpanzee. He says, it's the animal that morphologically most closely resembles us human beings. And therefore, he predicted it will also prove to be the most intelligent of the non-human animals. Now, what amazes me as a scientist, he actually challenged both in his Origin of Species and its Descent of Man. Here's my theory. Here's how you can prove me right or prove me wrong. But many of the experiments he challenged his contemporaries to perform were not performed. In fact, it wasn't until 15 years ago that any scientist actually put to the test Charles Darwin's claim. Is it true that the animals that look most like us also most closely match us intellectually? And so 15 years ago, a paper was published by two field biologists, Johann Buchholz and Clive Wynne. And this is what they said in the introduction. Like Darwin, biologists have tended to assume that species with shared ancestry will have similar cognitive abilities, namely that the chimpanzees and the orangutans would most closely match our cognitive intellectual capabilities. But they pointed out in their paper, this is simply incorrect, that ravens and Caledonian crows far surpass chimpanzees in intellectual capabilities. It is true a chimpanzee will use a tool to recover a food treat. But what they noticed with ravens and Caledonian crows, they'll go through 8 different tools and an 8-step process to recover a food treat. And my own dad had a pet raven, and he had this big cage for his pet raven. And because he was an engineer, he actually designed 20 different locks for the cage. And then he would throw metal shavings inside the cage. And the raven would jump inside the cage, wait for my dad to lock him in, and then grab some of these shavings and pick the lock. But would only do it if my dad was watching. If there's no audience, just ignored it. And would pick the lock, the raven would hop outside, wait for my dad to change the lock, then hop back in, grab a different set of tools, and pick the second lock. He could do that with 20 different locks. But again, only did it if there was a human audience. Okay. Well, another group of biologists, and so yes, the chimpanzee's not the smartest non-human animal. When somebody says you're a bird brain, they're actually giving you a compliment. Okay. But another team of biologists wrote a paper making this point. There is a significant discontinuity in the degree to which human and non-human animals possess capabilities of a physical symbol system. And the entire paper was dedicated to the fact that we're the only species on planet Earth that has symbolic capabilities, the ability to invent symbols and use symbols. So for example, unlike all of you, no non-human animal can appreciate the meaning, the beauty, and the elegance of these gorgeous Higgs field equations. And if you want to know why you have mass, it's because of these equations. So if you're concerned about your weight, hey, these equations explain it all for you. But it's more than that. No non-human animal can read the first page of the first reader for grade 1 students. And when I was going through grade 1, it was fun with Dick and Jane. And more than that, no non-human animal can figure out what any of these very simple symbols mean. You can't teach even a raven what a stop sign means. They can't react to these symbols. But we invent these symbols and use them all the time. And these 3 researchers concluded their paper with a statement. We show that the symbol relational discontinuity pervades nearly every domain of cognition. We alone have symbolic capability. And it's because of that symbolic capability we're able to engage in philosophy, theology, and higher mathematics. So we're much more than just animals. And we can actually now demonstrate that the soulless animals, the birds and mammals, really were designed to serve and please us. So field experiments have been done on parrots. In fact, when I came here this morning, there were a bunch of noisy parrots hanging around our church here. And what they've shown in field experiments is that these parrots haven't been shown to dance to the beat in the wild, even to songs of their courtship displays. So yes, they're musical creatures, but they will not combine their music with their dancing. But they will if they're bonded to a human being. They won't for a lifelong mate, but they will if they're bonded to a human being. And when I was growing up in Vancouver, British Columbia, I had this pet bird, Pedro. And Pedro loved to dance to Bach concertos. And his favorite was the Brandenburg Third. He really went all out whenever I played the Brandenburg Third, going to this incredible dance and actually be singing along with it. Now, I had two sisters who were into rock music. And because the bird was bonded to me and not to my sisters, every time my sisters played the rock music, he would go into a screeching tantrum until they turned it off. And my mother would say, "Your bird is a music snob." And I says, "No, my bird's not a music snob." But what they'd noticed in experiments, these birds will dance to the favorite music of the human they're bonded to. So it all depends on the human, what kind of music they claim to appreciate. But I'll tell you something else about Pedro, is that I didn't have to potty train him. He potty trained himself. He would sit on my shoulder and figured I didn't like me having him spot my shirts. So what he would do, he would tug on my earlobe when he needed to go, and I would take him to one of his perches. He would go hop back on my shirt. I never had a spotted shirt. He potty trained himself. And every morning, he would inspect my face to see where I missed a whisker when I was shaving. And if I did, he'd clip that whisker out, and I'd take care of that. But the thing that really annoyed my parents is, I had a grandfather that loved playing bridge. He taught me how to play bridge. And so my parents and my grandfather and I would play bridge. Pedro would be sitting on my shoulder. But somehow that bird knew when I won a bridge hand. And every time I did, he would go into a little song and a victory dance on my shoulder. I remember my mother saying, "It's bad enough to lose to her son at bridge, but his bird gloats." So yes, what we notice is that these animals behave differently when they're bonded to a higher being than they do when they're simply bonded to one another. Big hint, there's a spiritual lesson in that. Now, what Job 38 and 39 basically demonstrate is how certain of these higher animals were crucial for launching and maintaining human civilization. And if you read Job 38 and 39, you see a top 10 list. I notice some sports shows always have kind of the top 10 highlights of the day. Well, the book of Job talks about the top 10 animals that he created to assist our human beings. And here they are. It's the lion, the raven, the goat, the deer, the donkey, the ox, the ostrich, the horse, the hawk, and the eagle. And the reason why it mentions these 10, in the book of Job, it devotes a paragraph to describing how each of these 10 relates to us human beings and serves and pleases and teaches us. So again, commend those 2 chapters to you. And here are the highlights, that God created each of these creatures with unique soulishness to serve or please humans in a distinct way. You see this in Genesis 2, where God had Adam examine all these higher animals and give them an appropriate name, making the point each one was designed in a different way to serve and please human beings. So don't treat your cat like you do your dog. They're designed in a different way to serve and please you. I heard you talk about your cats and dogs earlier. Okay, amen, right. Okay. And how each fulfilled crucial roles in launching and sustaining civilization, and each one challenges the naturalistic evolution. Now, I was raised in secular public schools and went to secular universities, and maybe you were too. And what I was taught even in elementary school is that the donkey and the horse naturally evolved from a common ancestor. And when you look at the donkey and the horse, they're incredibly similar physically. You can ride both of them, and they look very similar. In fact, you can mate a donkey with a horse and get a mule. And so this is the basis of the evolutionary paradigm. They must have naturally evolved from a common ancestor. Now, what's being overlooked here, yes, they have very similar physical features, but they have radically different soulish features, especially in the way they relate to human beings. And so the donkey, for example, when it's bonded to a human being, is exceptionally wary of danger. It helps its owner to avoid risks and is highly sure-footed. There's a reason why they have you ride donkeys down into the Grand Canyon and not horses. The donkey will ensure that if there's a snake in the way, you're not going to be harmed. It'll back up. It'll make sure that you're kept safe as you go down those treacherous trails into the bottom of the Grand Canyon. The horse, on the other hand, has an opposite personality, an opposite way of dealing with human beings, is that it's very loyal and obedient, but it loves danger, it loves adventure. And so early humans recognized you do not ride donkeys into battle. As soon as a donkey sees the arrows and the spears, it heads in the opposite direction. It's designed to keep you safe. A horse, on the other hand, you see this explicitly in Job 39. The horse loves adventure, it loves danger. It will take you into the most dangerous situations. But the other thing the horse will do, it will sacrifice its health, it will sacrifice its own life to keep you safe in the most dangerous of situations. Now, my grandfather was a World War I hero, and his role in World War I was to ride a horse at night, get behind the German lines, spy on what the Germans were doing, and get back. And when he told my father, I never met him because he died from his war wounds, but what he told my father was 4 times a horse would sacrifice his life so he could safely get back to the Canadian lines. And so he was highly decorated, but when he got decorated and had tea with the king and queen twice, he basically told the king and queen, my horse should be getting the medal, not me. The sword that you're giving me should be given to my horse. Loyal and obedient. But notice how different the horse and the donkey are in the way they relate to us human beings. And also what it says about the donkey, and this is right in the book of Job, if you lose your donkey, don't worry about it. It's able to go from being domesticated to being wild without a hitch. And if 3 months later you find your wild donkey, the donkey will immediately bond to you. That will not happen with a horse. If a horse goes feral, it stays feral. But a donkey can go from being domesticated to being domesticated and wild again. Well, going back to the verse that we began with, ask the beasts and they'll teach you, or the birds of the air and they will tell you. Well, it seems like parts of our society is not getting the message from the animals. If you look at Pew and Barna surveys of the spiritual state of humanity here in America and around the world, they document what's called the rise of the nuns. These nuns are people who say, I don't care about religion, I have no religious affiliation, the issue of God doesn't really come up in my endeavors. Maybe he exists, maybe he doesn't. And as you can see, it's gone from 2% of the world's population in 1900 to 35% in the year 2020. Moreover, when they talk to older teenagers, it's double what it is in the rest of the population. So twice as many teens identify themselves as nuns compared to adults. But where do you find these nuns? What I've noticed in these surveys, they really didn't get into the details of where these nuns live. Now, I've been engaging non-Christians around the world, debating scientists around the world. Every atheist scientist I debated resides in a big metropolitan city. And what you notice is this, only in big metropolitan cities where there's little contact with wild, soulish animals that have not been abused by humans does atheism thrive. I remember going out in 1980 and 1983 into the rural parts of Africa. I didn't meet anybody who didn't believe in God. They all believed in God. They saw it in the animals around them. When I was in Johannesburg and Cairo, yeah, that's where I found the nuns, the atheists. But notice, they were cut off from contact with these wild mammals and birds that had not been abused by humans. They were also cut off from Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God, or Psalm 97, verse 6, the heavens declare the righteousness of God. There's something about having the heavens available to you that speaks a message to all of humanity. Abraham, when he looked up at the night sky, could see 15,000 stars with the naked eye. He could see galaxies with the naked eye. Okay, go outside tonight. Count how many stars you can see. If you get past 30, you're doing really well. Now, I've been in big metropolitan cities in Asia where even on the clearest night, you can't see a single star. You can't even see Venus and Jupiter. And the moon has to be up high in the sky in order to see it. When it's low on the horizon, the air pollution prevents its view. So there, the heavens don't declare anything at all. People can't see them, which is why I'm grateful for the James Webb Space Telescope and the Hubble Space Telescope. It's actually communicating to people in big cities the glory that Abraham could see routinely every night. But the animals, they were created to assist and please and relate to us. Now, one thing I try to do with my family is every summer take them into the wilds of British Columbia, where I was born and raised, and actually go to those places where there's no trails, no roads. The only way to get in is by helicopter. So they drop you off with a helicopter. They pick you up a week later. But this is a place where you get to engage animals that have not been abused by human beings. And when they haven't been abused by human beings, they behave in a very different way. So here's a photo I took of a couple of goats that joined us for lunch. And my son was with me and says, "Dad, they're wanting our food." I said, "No, they don't. They don't like our food. They just want to hang with us." And so they stood with us throughout the whole lunchtime. And I says, "Here, watch what happens when we finish our lunch. They'll go with us down the mountain. But at a certain point where there's bears, they'll stop going down with us. They just want to be around us." And then there's this little guy here. This is a woolly marmot. They get to be 20 pounds. They're big in Canada. Anyway, he was hiding in his little rock hole, but as soon as I walked by, he came out to engage me. And so here you get to see him looking straight at me. And then for 10 minutes, he did a little dance in front of me while I began to take more and more photos. He wanted to entertain me. So this dance went on. And this wasn't the only marmot that did that. But it basically shows they really are designed to serve and please us. And it's not just these easy-to-tame creatures like the goats and the marmots that do this. I've seen this even with bears. I remember being up at 10,500 feet. You don't expect to find bears there. But above me, this 450-pound bear jumped right out. And that can be kind of terrifying. But what I realized is the bear just wanted to spend time. And so he basically walked off and sat down in front of me. So I got out my camera and took some photos. So, but I made sure I was at 30 feet away because I didn't know what was going to go on there. But the bear just stared right at me. He was making eye contact with me the whole time. But one of the big lessons you get from these animals, their full potential is reached only when they're bonded to a higher being. So what they've discovered, for example, with ravens, is that they will outperform their wild cousins when they're bonded to a human being. They'll do things that they can't do. And so like my father's raven was able to outperform wild ravens because of the bonded relationship it had. And we see this with all the birds and mammals. We see this with chimpanzees. They outperform their wild cousins when they have this emotionally bonded relationship with a human being. There's a lesson there. As these animals outperform their wild cousins when they're bonded to a higher being, likewise we human beings outperform our wild cousins when we're bonded to a human being. Now, I gave my life to Jesus Christ when I was a sophomore physics student. And what I noticed almost immediately is how my grades radically improved after I gave my life to Jesus Christ. Suddenly the anxiety was gone out of my life. I was understanding things about my physics I never understood before. And so all of us who are now followers of Jesus Christ can look back and realize there was an exponential jump the moment we gave our lives to Jesus Christ, and what we're able to do compared to what we couldn't do before. Now, what is it that causes these animals to run away from us instead of towards us? It's something called sin. And what I've noticed is when you're engaging these wild animals that have never been abused by humans, they come towards you. They don't run away from you. The first time I experienced this is when I was in my 20s, where I took a vacation all by myself in a place where I knew humans had never been in the past 50 years. I set up my little pup tent, and within 2 hours, I was surrounded by these birds and small mammals. When I woke up in the morning, they were inside the tent with me. They want to be with you. They want to come to you. That's what happens when sin isn't a factor. It's also what happens when sin's not a factor for us human beings. It's our sin that causes us to run away from God or to pretend that he doesn't exist. And when the sin issue is taken care of, we're motivated to come towards God and relate to him. Now, I talk about 10 different spiritual lessons we can learn from these animals in this book, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job. But I love the way the book of Job ends, chapters 39 through chapter 42. And what you see is, look at the behemoth and the Leviathan. And the behemoth and the Leviathan are the two most difficult animals to tame. Basically, God is saying to Job and his friends, notice you've been able to tame all the different species of birds and mammals. Some are easy to tame, like the deer and the goat. Others are difficult to tame, like the lion. The most difficult to tame of all are the behemoth and the Leviathan. And if you look at commentaries for the first 19 centuries of the church, they've all agreed that the behemoth is a hippopotamus, a Leviathan is the Nile crocodile. There's debate in the 21st century, and I think that debate is generated by the fact most people don't have much contact with hippos and crocodiles. But people who do will acknowledge they are by far the most dangerous animals we humans can ever engage. Now, the hippo, as it tells us in the book of Job, is a herbivore. It's not trying to eat us, but it's highly territorial. And when I've been to Africa, and what I notice is the hippos love muddy water because they're easily sunburned. So at night, they get out of the water and they feed. In the daytime, they go into this muddy water, and they actually sink into the water where only their nostrils are up. And so the mud basically protects them from the sun and the mud in the water. But they're highly territorial, and the crocodiles know that. And so you notice is wherever you got hippos in the water, you got crocodiles surrounding them. But the crocodiles know not to get too close. They're no match for a hippo. But they also know that when humans come down in their boats in the water, they can't see the hippos until it's too late. The hippos will capsize the boat, throw all the humans in the water, and the crocodiles have lunch. So 95% of humans who die from encounters with animals die as a result from encounters with hippos and crocodiles. Now, they have been tamed. You can see a video clip of a South African family that has an adult tamed hippo. That hippo actually comes in for tea with them every day, but it needs 6 gallons of rooibos tea, and when it has tea, and actually joins them for meals. They'll actually come around the table with them. But what they will tell you is that they rescued that hippo from its mother when the mother died in childbirth. And so the first contact that baby hippo had was not with its mother, but with a human being. And basically, they spent daily time with that hippo. That's the only way you can tame a hippopotamus. You have to tame it from the moment that it's born and spend time with him. And when I was in Florida, I met a man that had a tame alligator. And same thing. He basically rescued that alligator the moment it came out of its egg and spent daily time handling that alligator. And he said, alligators are so challenging to tame, if you miss a day, you're dead. You got to spend time with them every single day in order to maintain that relationship. Very difficult to tame. But the way Job ends, chapter 42, God says to Job and his friends, you're the same way as these animals. Some of you are easy to tame, some of you are difficult to tame. But notice, these animals do not tame one another. It takes a higher being to tame these animals. He says, Job came to me for the humility he needed to have a relationship with me. You three did not. And so he said, I'm going to have my servant pray for you, that you will follow his example and get from me the humility you need to have a relationship. But yes, it takes a higher being to tame us wild human beings. As it takes a human to tame these animals, so too it takes a higher being to tame a proud human heart. And we've all been born with proud human hearts. So my close is this. Job humbly submitted to his Creator. What about us? Will I do what Job did? He's called one of the greatest, wisest, most humble men revealed in the Old Testament. He's an example for all of us. Job invited his Creator to humble and tame him. What about us? What about you? Well, the first service, we had a Q&A time afterwards. I'm going to hang around after the service is over and take questions from you. And if you want to ask questions in front of an audience, I do that every Sunday in Paradoxes. So I'm going to be teaching a class on how we can actually live a life of pulling together God's two books. God gave us the book of nature and the book of Scripture. There are two independent witnesses that testify of God and corroborate one another. How do we live that out? That's the message I'm going to be giving in Paradoxes at 12:15 today. But as mentioned, starting next week, we're going to launch a series on the early chapters of Genesis. And basically, as an evangelist, what I'm going to do is help you get through all the passages that skeptics and unbelievers say, hey, this is why I'm not a Christian. So I'm going to actually try to show you how to use those passages as a way to bring people to faith in Jesus Christ. And hey, I promise it'll be free of equations. Basically, it's going to be an introductory course. So thank you.